Well, hello, folks. This is Rebecca Adams, and I have two people with me tonight. I have Becky Vermeire that I co-host this program with, and we have.
Hello.
I always
Sorry,
interrupt you. I don't let you
I
finish
know.
that. Okay,
I had
try
to
it
stick
again.
my hello in. Hello.
There we go. You're such a nut. We love your Mrs. Doubtfire. Um, and then we have a special guest with us tonight, Adina Solomon, and she's going to share her story with us. And we are both really excited to hear this. So, um, Adina, do you want to just go ahead and dive in? And I'm not sure exactly where you want to start. If you want to start with your background or the abusive situation you came out of, you go where you're comfortable.
Perfect. I will just kind of start from the beginning, if that's all right with you all.
Absolutely.
Okay. And I want to thank you both for inviting me to participate. And like you both said, I do hope that the story impacts someone and they can grow and get out of their abuse. So that's my prayer in this.
Thank you for joining us tonight.
Yeah.
Thank you. I grew up in an abusive family. My dad was abusive. And what is kind of interesting is I have an older brother and a younger sister, and both of them were physically abused. I was never touched the whole time I was growing up. So as a child, I always thought, what's wrong with me? You know, why am I not loved? Because that's how he displayed love. And so I thought, what's wrong with me? As an adult, I realized that's a very childish way to see love. And he actually loved me more because he wasn't physically abusive. He was both physically and verbally abusive. So he would yell. It was just, I would try to be very quiet and very organized and like literally, and my mom still shares this story today, I would keep my books in order, in height order. So, and my bed was always meticulously made, and my clothes, all my long sleeve shirts were together, my short, like I was very organized to avoid that yelling or the conflict that would happen or him being physical with my brother or sister. But because of that, I learned physical abuse. So my boy's dad was physically abusive to me. And that's what was ingrained in me. And I learned through that. And I thought because he did it behind closed doors, my kids didn't know, didn't see it. And I was great at covering up bruises. I was great at covering up, the pain, the hurt. And my oldest son was about 6 years old, and I had asked him to turn off the TV. And he said no and got up and went to hit me. At that, I realized I can't do this.
Wow.
I have to break this cycle. 2 days later, I filed for divorce and I took my kids. And this is crazy, but I moved in with my mom and dad because my dad had started to go to counseling to stop his cycle. And I, of course, went to counseling and tried to, see, but I was like, what's wrong with me? And what is it? And at that point, it was like still blaming myself. And it took many, many years, probably like into my 40s, for me to realize it's not me. But so their dad and I divorced. I remarried shortly after that. Again, because I hadn't figured out what it was that was going to break the cycle. I again married someone that's abusive. And this time it was physical and emotional and verbal. So it was all of it, you know. And I realized shortly after, it wasn't even a full year, filed for divorce again.
Wow.
And spent a lot of time being single and working on myself. Met a guy and was like, oh, he's perfect. He's this, he's that. Wow. My counselor has told me many times that he's a narcissist, and didn't fully understand that. Thought, oh, I can get out of this, no big deal. You know, yes, he's physically abusive, but he didn't show that until we were together 3-4 years. Or I guess it was 2.5 years in. And it just progressively got worse. But because of his narcissism, I believed I could never do any better. You know, I believed that I wasn't smart. I wasn't loved enough. There was nobody that could love me. So it just became this vicious cycle. About a year ago, it was actually a year ago in August, he got angry and broke my arm. At that, I'm like, done. Have to walk away. And he had moved away to Texas, so I thought that would be great. I'm here, he's there. It's this separation, it's physical. And so this physical separation will help as well. And needless to say, he came to visit in May. And of course, you know, because there's that draw, there's that, you know, connection. I kind of let him back in a little bit. He got crazy, and that was the final thing. And I have had no communication since then with him. But what has been amazing is I realized I can't do it alone. You know, and I can pray and pray and pray as much as I want. And he hears me. I know Jesus hears me. I know he does. But it was reaching out and having people that made me accountable. And like I would say, hey, he's emailing, or he's this, or he's that. And because I had blocked him on all social media, on the phone, on everything, but he would still, you know, message me through somebody else's phone or change his email address. But it was finding people that loved me, that I could say, hey, I need you. I need you to just text me back, call me, whatever. And so now it's incredible. I look back a year and I'm like, I'm not that person a year ago. And it's not just one thing. It's not just having friends. It's going to counseling. It's praying. It's going to church, finding your church. It's so many things, because I've had people ask, what is it? What's the thing that changed? It's not just one thing. For me, it was a multitude of things that happened. And I look at my boys and I was like, I don't want this for them. And that's what I was teaching them. I don't want them to be in a relationship like that. Mm-hmm. I have to break the cycle. I have to be healthy for them to be healthy. Mm-hmm. And yeah. And it's amazing to look back and think, wow, I've gone through this. But you know what? The one thing that has been consistent is I've had Jesus the entire time. No matter the good days, the bad days, the days where I'm on my hands and knees and don't know what else to do, can't pray, can't say a word, but I can cry. Mm-hmm. And I know that it's him that has brought me to where I am today. And it's a blessing. It truly is. I just probably way overwhelmed you and like inundated you with a ton of stuff. and like probably should have paused more, but yeah.
Nope, you're just fine. You're just fine. Becky is the queen of questions. I just took notes for myself just so that I remember the different things that you said. Becky, what do you have for questions?
Well, the first question I have is I'd kind of like to ask you if we could dive a little bit deeper into that childhood experience.
Yeah.
Because it's not typical, honestly, in that situation where you're talking about 3 children in the home and 2 children are physically abused and 1 child is not. But I'm curious what kind of a relationship your dad would have had with your mother.
He was abusive to Mom.
Mhm.
And still, I tell her to this day, I don't know how you put up with it. I don't. And I'm the middle child, older brother, younger sister. What's fascinating is that my dad is Jewish. My mom was Catholic and she converted. But I have known Jesus since I was teeny tiny, and my mom we weren't raised that way. And my brother actually works for a synagogue where I was in ministry before the job I have now. So it is kind of interesting, the dynamics. And my mom, I guess I was maybe 12, 13 years old, and she came to all of us and said she wanted to file for divorce. And I completely supported it. Completely. My sister, who I felt like received the brunt of it, because my brother, he's 6 years older than I, so he was already gone. He was in college and off, and so she was enduring all of his ugly. She told my mom, no, don't stay, trying to make it work. And she and I have talked now that we're older, and she said, people can change, and I believe people can change. But, he repeats his cycle over and over. Yeah.
And so he was physically abusive to your mom as well.
Yes.
Physically, verbally, emotionally, the whole gamut as well.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So then when you say that you went back and stayed with him for a time, that was going to be another question that I had written down. You said that he had gone into counseling,
yeah,
and was attempting to change his behavior. So I was curious how successful he was at that.
It helped for a time. It did. But the physical abuse has stopped. He doesn't do that, but the yelling, the emotional, that continues to this day. And as an adult, my heart hurts for him, because in all the counseling I've gone through, I realize he hasn't gotten to that root, whatever it is that causes him to behave or act in that way, to break the cycle, to not yell, to not hurt. And someone way wiser than I am told me long ago, hurt people hurt others. And my prayer for him is just to figure out what his hurt is, so he can stop and find joy, like pure joy.
Yeah. So one of the things that we do when we record this program is we try to throw a little bit of education in the process as well. And so one of the things I wanted to throw out there, and I'm curious what your thoughts are on it when I get to the conclusion of what I'm going to say. So I know there's been situations where I've worked with victims of domestic violence before, and you're making me think of one particular one. I worked with a woman who was in her mid-60s, and her husband had been physically abusive to her in the early days of their relationship. But at some point, as the relationship went on, he stopped being physically abusive. And so when she did finally reach out for help, she reached out for help because the anger that he still had going on, you know, the name calling and the belittling was just getting to the point where she had completely lost herself in that process. And so one day we were talking about that, and I sat down with her and I talked to her a little bit about the power and control wheel of domestic violence. Are you familiar with that?
No.
Okay. It kind of talks about the different types of abuse that a person can encounter in an abusive relationship, but it's all of the tactics that are not physical abuse. And so I sat down with her and we talked about the power and control wheel, and what she saw on that was everything but the physical was taking place in her current relationship. And so the conversation that we had with that, I had with her, abusers are motivated to maintain power and control over their victims. And what he had learned is he had learned how to maintain that power and control without having to hit her anymore. So it was still just as abusive as it was, but she also knew there was it sounds unreasonable to the reasonable mind. There was a point in that relationship where she knew if she didn't pass that point, he wouldn't be physically abusive with her. And so she basically had made a decision that these other types of abuses were going to be okay in the relationship. And then finally, one day she got to that place where it was not okay for those other kinds of abuses to take place in the relationship. So the reality is he didn't have to hit her anymore because everything else that he was using against her was helping him maintain that power and control. Is that a similar dynamic, do you think, to what you're seeing in your parents' relationship?
To some extent, at times, yeah. Yeah. So the physical stopped because shortly after she told them that she wanted to file for divorce. And then that's when the counseling started. So then that stopped that. And when she communicates back to him, I can't take the yelling, I can't take the hurt, I can't take the way you treat me, he will stop for a time period, but then he goes back to it, because by nature we just get back into the same, I hate to say rut, but that's what it looks like to me until, and I've told her, Mom, the only one that has the power to change this is you, because it is you that has to make your decisions, not him make decisions for you, but you have to make these choices for you. She hears me, but I don't know if she's listening.
How long have your parents been married?
A long time. Okay, so 50 some years. Yeah. They were, so my brothers, hold on, I'm doing the math. So 54 years, 55 years. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So it seems like it's reached a point where, kind of similar to that scenario. I mean, I know that you say she's the only one that can change herself. Yes, and she can't change him, obviously. But unfortunately, what we see, unless an abuser is willing to take accountability for their behavior, an abuser will continue to abuse. And so she may have had the ability to maybe draw a line where he understands, if I cross that line, I've gone too far. Yeah. But these are the things that I understand that she will tolerate. I know it sounds crazy to our listeners. I'm trying to say that doesn't make sense, but there may be that line where he's willing to, and she's willing to, so to speak, where they've almost made a pact somehow that they're going to live in this relationship with abuse taking place as long as it doesn't become physical again. That's kind of what it sounds like.
Yeah. It seems like chaos to me. It feels like chaos to me.
My thinking on that is, if I was in your shoes, it would feel like chaos because you've gotten healthier, you know, and so to go back into that would be like insanity for you to step back into that, and you're going to be able, excuse me, to see things you couldn't have seen before.
Yes. Yes.
Or maybe I should say you could have seen them, but you wouldn't have known what was going on. Maybe that's a better way to say it.
Right. And so, for example, like my boys will go visit their dad for Christmas. And I mentioned that they would be gone and I'll be here alone. And at first, my mom said, well, why don't you come stay with us? And as she's saying it, she says, well, maybe you should go visit your brother and sister. Just stops because she realizes what it does. Like, yes, we go have dinner with them a couple, twice a week, things like that. And, I'll go pick her up and we'll go shopping or whatever. But she also realizes I am where I am. And she sees that and she's like, I'm so proud of you. She's like, and I said, Mom, you can do this.
Yeah.
You can do this. It's not like I have magic fairy dust or anything but you can do this. And I said, I want this for you.
What do you know about your mom's family of origin? Was her parental relationship, was it the same way?
No.
Your grandparents on her side?
My grandfather was military. Grandma went to 8th grade. So she never went to high school, didn't graduate. But never saw him yell, scream. I mean, as he got older, he did because he was going deaf and he couldn't hear anything, but never them fighting.
I hear a couple of similarities to a couple of pieces of my story. I was the only one that was not abused physically, or, well, you can't live in a house like that without getting emotional abuse. I mean, that's not going to happen. But he was very physically abusive to my brother and sister. I'm the youngest. I'm not the middle. So you're the middle. I'm the youngest. And then when he divorced my mom because he'd been having an affair. And so when about 5 years had transpired after the divorce, then my mom got remarried. And he was abusive as well, but it was a different type. It was where you'd have to live in the house to see it, because you definitely didn't see it from the outside looking in. Okay. Mm-hmm. And it was different types of abuse than what my biological father had. So she was married to him for over 40 years before he died. And she and I had several conversations. And I said, Mom, you don't have to stay. You've almost left twice. And I said, you can leave. You don't have to stay there. Oh, well, she'd always make an excuse. And it broke my heart because she didn't get to find out what that freedom really felt like. I could really identify with those two things that you're talking about. Becky, I know your wheels are turning.
Well, the thing that I was going to throw out there, hearing you say that, hearing both of you just share that story about your parents, we have to remember and put things in perspective, because when we're talking about domestic violence, the laws have changed drastically since your parents were young in their marriage relationships. And so I live in the state of Missouri, so I know for a fact in the state of Missouri didn't even have an Adult Abuse Act until 1980. So anything prior to the last 40 years or beyond the last 40 years ago, there were no such things as domestic violence shelters and services that could be provided. And so there was a little bit of that, this is the situation I'm in. If I can't go to my family, for example, or my family has that, this is your marriage, this is your relationship, you're a grown up, you have to deal with it, which unfortunately, generationally, we're talking that time frame. People were told, this is the situation you're in. And then unfortunately, there was no call the police and have law enforcement support your right to not be abused, again, because there was no law against it. So we're battling with those things. And so I feel that with both of your mother situations. I think there's a little bit of that taking place. The good news is we've made great strides since then. And, you know, people are a lot more educated about domestic violence, including the lawmakers and the powers that be. And even now where we sit today, people know about it. People understand what it is. People are used to hearing the words. In 1980, if you said domestic violence, the general public would say, I don't know what that is. Mm-hmm. You know, it was an anomaly, that's something that didn't make sense. And so we do have to take those things into consideration as well. So Adina, I give you credit for the fact that you've made this decision in your family. I'm going to break that cycle and it's not going to happen. And so, you know, earlier before we started recording, you talked about your children, and your focus now is to make sure that your children are not living that same life. And so that's what we can do. And, you know, our generation and of the age, we can make sure that we're raising children who understand what abuse is and that they don't have to stay in a situation that is abusive. That's the purpose of telling stories like this and bringing the awareness.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because if I don't make the choice, it will just continue on and on and on for generations to come. And I don't want that for them. And I don't want that for their wives or for their children.
Would you say, going back to how they did not come out of their rooms, Becky, would you say that was a coping mechanism?
Certainly.
Yeah.
Certainly. I mean, here's the thing. We talk about it all the time when we talk about children that are in abusive relationships, regardless of their age. We may think, oh, they don't hear. They hear and they see. And if they don't hear and see, they have the same gut instincts that we have. When, how many times have you walked into a room and you're like, oh my, like the tension in this room is awful. And so I don't want to be in this room. And so we remove ourselves. Children in the home, as they get older, have the ability to do that and see that as well. And so I absolutely would say that that was a coping skill. It was more comfortable to sit alone in the room than it was to be in that tension, and they could feel it. Mm-hmm. And then, you know, or they might have heard something said in the direction of their mother that was not okay with them. And so it was safer in some respects, because especially with boys, as they get older, there's that pull to want to step in and say, hey, you can't talk to my mom like that, or you can't do that to my mother. And it's safer, honestly, for them to remove themselves. So really, that was probably the best coping skill they could have came up with, honestly. Mm-hmm. I'm glad that you mentioned that you have a network of friends who had said to you, keep being loving, keep being, I can't remember the words that you just said, but that's something that victims of domestic violence will struggle so much, especially if they've been in more than one abusive relationship. They want to look at that and they want to say, what's the matter with me? What's wrong with me? Why am I trusting this person, or why am I believing this person, or whatever that it is? And we teach all of the time, is being loving a quality that you like about yourself? Yes. Is being trusting a quality that you like about yourself? Yes. Is being supportive, and and the list goes on and on and on. Mm-hmm. Then my response to that is, don't you dare let that abuser take those things away from you. Mm-hmm. Embrace that, because when we're talking about someone in an abusive relationship, the only thing that a victim in an abusive relationship has done, if somebody has to accuse them of anything, which I wish people didn't, but if you're going to be accused of anything, the only thing you've done is you believe somebody who said they loved you. Mm-hmm. That's what you did. Mm-hmm. We've all done that. And so to try to put this blame on the victim in that situation is simply not okay. And then for the victim to walk away and question those attributes about themselves that are the good things, the things that we love about ourselves, that's what an abuser does, is it robs us of those things. Mm-hmm. So I'm thankful that your friends understand that and they encourage you in that way.
They're the family that I choose, not the one you're born into. That's the one thing, is knowing that there's people. It was me having to have the courage to reach out. And to be honest, I couldn't be where I am without them, without Jesus, without it. Yeah, it's amazing. It really is.
Yeah, I always say, if you have one or two people in your corner that you can truly trust, you don't have a lot, you don't need a lot, one or two people that you can go to and say, hey, this is my stuff. Mm-hmm. And they say, I love you.
Mhm.
You know, and so it's powerful. You know, you hear that nudging from God saying, be bold. What's powerful about that? Two things, I think. Your abuser has told you nobody's going to believe you when you tell them that I'm doing these things. And so we're inclined to believe the abuser is correct and nobody's going to believe me. And so it does take that strength to reach out at least one time and tell your story. And what you found when you told that network of friends, they believed you. Then part two, the other thing that we're afraid of when we try to tell our stories, our abuser has said, if you tell someone, there's going to be consequences. And so the consequences, the abuse intensifies. So we as victims, if we're in that victim situation, we don't want the abuse to intensify. And so it's a huge, huge, huge step of boldness to even quietly say, to whisper it, I need help. And if you find that person who hears that and they want to reach out, it makes all the difference in the world.
Because I look back now and think, I didn't know what I needed. And still to this day, they're like, I didn't feel like I helped you. And I was like, oh, beyond words.
Mm-hmm. I know for me that just seeing people that love me, it redefined love for me. I was able to see love for what what it really is and what it's supposed to be in a relationship. Is that what you found?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I had a pastor who his philosophy is be love. And that is one thing, like ever since I was little, anybody that meets me, they're like, Adina, you just love people. And I do. I love people I don't even know. Like I'll go into Walmart and I love them. I don't know them, but I love them. And if I could hug people, I would hug them. But, COVID's kind of messed that up. And, but I would, I see somebody crying and I will stop whatever it is. I don't care. I feel that that is what God has made me. If I can show love to somebody, oh, it just makes my day. Mm-hmm.
And, just even being able to reach out to somebody is bold, like Esther, but also you never know, as God opens up doors for you to share your story like this, like you're doing tonight, you could change a nation. You don't know, and especially that ripple effect. Becky, do you have any stories about a ripple effect and how that just keeps going and going?
I do. I was going to ask a question though, real quick. Can I ask a question real quick?
Sure.
Or you want me to tell a ripple effect story?
Yes.
Which one?
You go for whatever.
Well, I'm curious because Rebecca, you made a statement and you used the expression redefined love for you. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to talk about that just for a minute. Because one of the questions I had written down, Adina, when you were initially telling your story, I'm still so amazed, intrigued, baffled, any one of those words. And the same in your situation too, Rebecca, with 3 children and 2 are abused and 1 is not. In my mind, in that situation, Adina, what you said is that you felt like the definition of love was the one that was being abused. And so you didn't feel loved as a child because you weren't being abused. And so I'm just curious, when you talked about going through some counseling and some things like that, how did that transform? Because I would think, like in your first abusive relationship as an adult, if physical abuse took place, that translated into love for you. Mm-hmm. Until all of a sudden it didn't feel good anymore. Yeah. And so I'm curious, how did that process of redefining love take place in your life? And you too, Rebecca, I'm curious your thoughts on that as well.
Go ahead, Adina.
So for me, with children, we love, it's unconditional, and I would never, ever in a million years think about physically hurting my kids. And I felt like God gave them to me to protect them. And then when my oldest raised his hand to be physical, I was like, no, that is not love. And immediately it was a trigger for me. but that's exactly what I'm accepting as love. And I was like, done. I can't do it. And I can't do it for them. Being in his word to see what is love. And it is none of those things, First, Corinthians, be patient, love, kindness, all of those things. And that is not at all what abuse is. None of those.
I think one of the purest forms of love that we have if we're parents is that love for our child. Like the second we meet our child for the very first moment and we look in their face, that's it. Like that's the purest, true definition of love I think that you can come up with. And so I think in your situation, the fact that your 6-year-old was showing you behaviors that you knew were not love, I think that was so eye-opening for you. I think he was probably the catalyst for that redefining a love in your life. I think that's what you're saying too. Like that's amazing.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a powerful story.
Mm-hmm. What about you, Rebecca? How do you think you redefined love in that situation? Because you were the odd man out, so to speak, in your home of origin as well. It just kind of baffles me how even the statement that your dad made saying, I'm not going to touch this one, like for people who want to think that abusive behavior is out of control behavior, what a powerful answer to that question right there. If your dad knows well enough to say, I'm not going to touch this one, it's not out of control. It just further confirms how purposeful domestic violence truly is.
Yeah.
It just intrigues me so much that that situation can happen, and to have two people in that situation basically in the same room is just interesting to me.
It is interesting. I began to meet these just wonderful people, just left and right. It was like, where have you been all my life? And it was fabulous that just the healing that took place in me, just being around them, being accepted, being loved. And my friends, just like with you, Adina, they have become my family of choice, just so accepting and loving. And wow, that is not what I had. And I don't think I really saw it quite like that until you were talking, Adina. And I realized, wow, that really did redefine love for me.
You know, I have the opportunity in the work that I do, I see that take place all of the time. And I can think every single week when we have our weekly support groups, you can see that where we have people coming in various stages of healing, where someone has just came into shelter from being physically abused last night, to someone who's been in shelter for 3 months, to somebody who's been in transitional housing for 6 months, to someone who's moved on and recovered and healed, and they're thriving in their situation and still coming back. But one person telling their story facilitates change, and everybody's sitting in that room. And so I firmly believe that, Adina, you telling your story tonight facilitates change. Rebecca, I mean, you're a prime example of the ripple effect, and the fact that you experienced it, including going through shelter and everything else, and turned around and had the ability to heal from that, thrive from that, write a book about it. And now people are reading your story and the same thing. We just never know what we're going to say. Or Adina, you've been talking about seeing somebody crying in Walmart, and just that expression of love that you want to share with them makes all the difference in the world. And you don't know that that kindness that you paid to that person at the store, they could have gone home and repaid that kindness to their neighbor or their children, or whatever that is. You know, that do random acts of kindness really does facilitate change everywhere that we go if we have the ability to do it.